Welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few things, a few housekeeping items. My name is Amy and I am the Community Engagement and Events Coordinator here at Freight Farms. And today we are going to be recording this event, so you will receive it in an email tomorrow. And at the very end of the event, Lexy will be doing a live Q&A. So feel free to use that Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen to submit questions. You don't have to wait until the very end to submit them. As soon as you think of them, go ahead and throw them right in there. If you'd like to just throw in where you're tuning in from into the chat, that would be awesome to see where everybody's located in the world. And now I will pass it over to Lexy, who will take this away.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate everyone for joining us today. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to your first day of class. So my name is Lexy. I'm going to be your instructor for today and this semester. And throughout the semester, we're going to be learning about hydroponics growing systems and controlled environment agriculture, and specifically with a focus on how we can use this technology and how a farmer can use this technology to showcase specific qualities in the plants that they're looking to grow. So we're going to use this knowledge to design an experiment where you're going to have the chance to work hands-on in a Freight Farms greenery like the one that I'm in right now. And we will control different variables to produce leafy greens with custom flavor profiles. That's sort of the goal of the experiment that we're going to be running throughout the semester. So today's lesson, we're going to quickly go through some of the basics of hydroponic farming. We're going to define what factors influence plant growth and what variables within our system you can control to get those plants to exhibit sort of different characteristics. And all of that is going to come to the end of our semester experiment, which is growing premium crops with controlled environment agriculture. So let's get right into it. So a brief overview of hydroponics. The main thing about that separates hydroponics from traditional agriculture is that hydroponics does not use soil. So we have a couple different means of providing the water element and the nutrient element to our plants in our growing system. Mainly, we have two different styles of hydroponics that we use. So right next to me right here is our seedling station. So this is where our plants start their life cycle, and we use an ebb and flow style hydroponic system. So this is sort of the traditional one that maybe you think about when you think about hydroponics. It's on a flat plane, and what happens is in our seedling tank right here, water is pumped across this table. All of our plants are receiving water, and then the pump stops, the water returns to the tank, and gets cycled back through for the next time that those seedlings are going to be needing to be watered. And then a little bit different behind me, you can see we have a vertical style going on. So behind me, we use drip emitters on an irrigation system that waters plants vertically. And so the gravity is going to pull that nutrient-rich water down the length of these panels, watering all of these plants. And then the water that is not consumed by the plants is similarly to our seedling area, going to be cycled back into our main tank, and that's going to be again recycled throughout the system. So this makes our farms extremely water efficient. But what is so important about water conservation within sort of the great umbrella of sustainability? In my opinion, I don't think we really give enough attention to how important water conservation is. Obviously, there's so many super important pieces to the sustainability puzzle, and I could have a whole conversation about that separately. But in terms of water sustainability, I mean, do you ever really think about where your drinking water comes from? The majority of our fresh water is stored in aquifers underground, but because of global rises in temperature, global increases in population, and an increased global demand of agriculturally intensive crops like meat and dairy, these factors really come together to increase the demand for water and also decrease the availability of water. So with kind of all of that in consideration, scientists have been projecting that the water that's stored in our aquifers in the next 20 to 30 years is going to start running dry. And we at Freight Farms definitely see this as a major problem, and we definitely think this is a problem that needs to be solved before it actually becomes a problem. So agriculture actually uses about 70% of the world's fresh water. And if you sort of think about how a traditional field is watered, so a farmer would spray water onto his crops, And then that water might escape into the atmosphere immediately just through evaporation. So that's never reaching the plants. Or that water might immediately drain through the soil and enter kind of groundwater and never interact with the plants. And then that water might also just sort of be lost in the soil nearby, and similarly might never interact with the plants. So those are three options of how you might be wasting water in a situation like that. And then a fourth example is when the plant is actually growing. It is releasing water vapor throughout its leaves through the process of evapotranspiration. And similarly, that water is being lost into the atmosphere and not able to be recaptured by the plant itself. So in our systems, we are actually using 95% less water than a traditional agricultural system, which is huge. So how we do that in our farms is that, like I sort of said, with that recycling, any water that is not uptaken by our plant's roots is being taken back to that main tank and being recycled again for later. But additionally, we're able to capture the water vapor that is released through the leaves through our dehumidifiers. And so any vapor that's present in the air will be captured by a dehumidifier, and that water will recondense into a liquid water, which can then be added back to the tanks. So we make sure we're not wasting any water in our system. So actually, there are a couple farmers I can think of who we call water positive. And that actually means they are capturing more water from their system than they're actually using to grow their plants. So they are making water by growing food instead of using water to grow food. So that's a pretty big deal. But there's also a lot of really amazing other things about hydroponics and reasons we should care about controlled environment agriculture. So in addition to water sustainability, we are able to maximize the amount of food grown per square foot with this technology. So I'm in a 40-foot shipping container right now. This has a footprint, if you could think about it as 320 square feet. But in this shipping container, we are able to grow the same amount of produce that a 2 to 3 acre field could in about a year. So that's a pretty big deal. But also, shipping containers are pretty easy to stack. So if you think about it, you could double that, or you could even triple that. So another thing about growing in a container is that you're not tied to the land. So any location can be a perfect location to grow food. For example, you may hear some outside noise every now and then. I'm actually in a parking lot under an underpass in downtown Boston, Massachusetts. So just to go ahead and show that you really can grow food anywhere. And another addition to not being tied to the land is that we don't have to use herbicides. We don't have to use pesticides. We aren't tied to whatever the weather is, because we can create a perfect climate in our farm every single day. So every day is a perfect growing day, 365 days a year. And then lastly, one of my favorite examples, being in a container means that you are able to be wherever you need to be. So the fact that a container is mobile means that you can grow your food immediately next to where you're going to be consuming that food. That reduces food miles, that reduces waste, and that definitely improves the nutritional quality of the food that you are going to be consuming, with it being so close and harvested so close to when it's actually being consumed. So I know I just threw a lot of information at you guys. I'm sure, Amy, maybe we've had some questions come in. Let's take a little break and see what people are thinking about.
Yeah, we had a great question come in regarding food miles and food waste. Why is it so important to reduce those two factors when right now and in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually one of my favorite topics. So food waste is huge because we actually probably grow enough food to feed everybody, but we waste about 30 to 40% of the food that we grow. And it's wasted sort of throughout the food chain. It's wasted sort of on the fields for things that, supermarkets don't deem edible or don't deem, sellable essentially. So food is wasted on the fields. Food is wasted in the grocery stores by expiration dates. Food is wasted in our homes by, again, expiration dates, things that we throw away. So being able to bring the farm close to where it's actually being consumed means that things aren't wilting in the way over to being consumed. Things aren't wilting in the field in the same kind of way. And similarly, reducing food miles. If we think about how pretty much all of the lettuce and leafy greens and sort of spinach that we consume, pretty much all of that is grown on the West Coast. And so for them to ship out all of that lettuce, well, the amount of carbon emissions that it takes to truck all of that food across the way, we could just grow that right next to where we'd be eating it. And it would not only be healthier for our bodies, but healthier for the environment and sort of better for everybody. Very cool. If we don't have any other questions, I think we are good to move on to sort of our next bit about sort of controlling different variables. Is that correct?
Yes, we'll get to more questions at the very end when we do the live Q&A.
Awesome, sounds good. Alrighty, so one of the major benefits of controlled environment agriculture is your ability to control different variables in your farm that would influence your plant's growth. So in our farm, the major components that you can control are going to be water, nutrients, light, and climate. So we're going to start with water. And we're going to talk a little bit about how in our farm we can control our water usage and then what sort of effects we can see from controlling our water usage. So we have multiple programmable pumps in our main area. And so through programming our pumps, we are able to control the frequency with which we water our plants. So how often we're watering our plants and the duration with which we water our plants. So the length of time our plants are receiving water. And through controlling both of those, we are able to actually improve the shelf life of our plants, which I think is super interesting. So if our plants are growing and towards the time that they're going to be ready to harvest, we kind of cut down the amount of water that they're receiving, those plants are going to be sort of prepared for what the post-harvest and sort of sitting in the grocery store or sitting in your fridge portion of their life is going to look like. They won't be receiving water during that time, and they need water to survive, but they're sort of more drought resistant or sort of water limited resistant in that time. So you will actually have produce that is going to sit better in your fridge and not wilt as quickly by utilizing changing sort of that water frequency. And then additionally, in terms of water duration, you can sort of control for sort of the thickness and sort of the sturdiness of your produce. So if you think about a plant that's receiving ample water is going to have sturdy cell walls, is going to be really nice and robust, whereas something that has sort of a shorter duration of time, it's going to be a little bit thinner, a little bit more tender. So we can sort of change the texture of the plants that we are consuming by changing sort of its water cycles. So next we're going to talk about nutrients and how nutrients and pH impact the produce that we grow in our farms. So these two go really, really hand in hand. Something really interesting is that the pH of the space around a plant's roots actually determines the type of nutrients and the amount of nutrients that it's able to uptake from its immediate environment. So plants have very specific pHs in which they will be able to absorb the nutrients that they need. In our farms, we usually keep it about 6 because that's kind of where everything sort of overlaps, but something could be better at absorbing nutrients at about 5. Some things are better at about 7.5. Most things sort of overlap at 6. And then through kind of channeling in and dialing in what exact pH our plants need, we can ensure that they are not experiencing any nutrient deficiencies, which is where they aren't able to have enough of a specific nutrient, or we can prevent additionally against nutrient toxicities, which is where plants receive too much of a nutrient, which can also be not so great for them. And then next we can talk about how we can control for lighting in our farms. So behind me, you can see we have 2 sort of separate grow rows, or actually four rows, but 2 kind of aisles. In between those are going to be our light panels. And in our sort of lighting space, we are able to have separate programmable light zones. And through controlling our lighting, we can control for lighting intensity, which means the essentially intensity of the light, or like the intensity of the sunlight. You want to think about it that way. We can control the duration of time that the lights are on. And we can also control the spectrum of light that we're using for our plants. So intensity and spectrum actually influence the color of the produce that you can produce. So if we, in our work from home time, have noticed that some of our plants have sort of leaves on the lighter color spectrum, they're not that saturated dark green color that we're kind of hoping for. That's most likely an issue of light intensity, because high intensity light is going to cause chlorophyll, the dark green pigment in plants, to sort of upcycle itself into a positive feedback loop and produce more and more dark green pigment. Whereas a lower light intensity environment is not going to produce as much of that dark green pigment, and therefore will produce a lighter colored plant, whereas high intensity light will give you a darker colored plant. And additionally, something really interesting, you can see in this photo right here that there are both red LEDs and blue LEDs in our farm. These actually separately have different impacts on our plant's growth. So red primarily focuses on sort of fruit and flower production in plants, whereas blue really focuses on sort of the stems and the roots of the plants. And we found actually that if you increase the length of time of blue lighting that you provide to your produce, you're actually able to encourage some of the red undertones of produce to come out. So for example, sort of red leaf lettuces, or sort of like purpley leafy greens, maybe like purpley kale, the more blue light you give them, you're actually able to sort of see those red undertones come out. So you can select for specific colors in your plants if you so choose to, which is pretty cool. And then lastly, that brings us to the climate aspect. Within controlled environment agriculture, we're able to control our environment. So that means we can control things like temperature, humidity, air movement, and the presence of CO2. And so most plants definitely have a specific temperature and humidity range that they're most comfortable in. So we can definitely dial that down in this space. Air movement is an interesting one because not only is that super important for making sure that there's no sort of buildup of humidity on any plant's leaves, which could lead to disease. We want to make sure that there's always wind moving to prevent that. Ample wind in an environment can also affect the structure of the plants that you're growing. So it can give them sort of a sturdier stem that they have to kind of like deal with the amount that they're being shaken around. They'll kind of grow nice and strong like that. So you can see some of this beautiful colors behind me. They have really nice sturdy stems because we have a lot of wind in here normally. I turned it off for you guys, but normally you wouldn't be able to hear me over the fans in here. So that's a pretty cool thing. But also when we grow things that need to be pollinated, for example, I was working in a farm that was growing tomatoes. Tomatoes need to be pollinated in order to grow fruit. So by cranking up the amount of wind in our farm, we were actually able to get the pollen to circulate and have those plants self-pollinate through the wind. So that was very cool to see. And then lastly, maybe my favorite thing that we can control in our farm is the amount of CO2 in the space. So if anyone can think of if anyone knows what the amount of parts per million of CO2 in our environment is right now, it's actually around about 400, which certainly we don't want to be raising any more than we have already at this point in time. But CO2 is basically what is the oxygen for plants and something that they really enjoy. So in our farms, we can increase that amount of CO2, whereas on a traditional agricultural field, or perhaps in a greenhouse, you don't really have the same ability to increase the presence of CO2 in that kind of way. It's going to sort of escape out into the atmosphere. You can't concentrate it in the way that you could in here. And increasing the amount of CO2, similar to in prehistoric times when there was so much oxygen in the air and dragonflies were able to grow as big as birds because of the amount of oxygen. Similarly, our plants with that increased CO2 are able to grow bigger, and they're able to grow faster because they have more oxygen to sort of take in. So Yeah, so with all of these different variables that I've just mentioned, there are a couple different types of experiments we can use, or we can use those variables to design a couple different types of experiments. And I'd like to think about these in two sort of different categories. Firstly, there's going to be the variables that you test simultaneously. And so that basically means you can run sort of your control and your experiment at the same time within the farm. So an example of that would be anything having to do with water. So like I said, we have programmable pumps. We have a programmable pump for this side of our farm, and we have one for this side of our farm. So if I wanted to see turning the water way down, I could keep this as a control, and I could tell this one to turn the water way down, and I could see what happens when I grew plants on both sides, and I'd be able to watch the results in real time. So I really like experiments like these because I like to have that side-by-side sort of data comparison. And then another example of an experiment that you could run simultaneously would be ones having to do with multiple light zones. So like I mentioned earlier as well, the left side of our farm and the right side of our farm are on different programmable light timers. So you can change that intensity, duration, and spectrum of light and see how that influences your plants as they grow side by side next to each other. And then the alternative means of experimenting is utilizing variables that require the entire farm to run an experiment. So that's going to be things like nutrient concentration and climate. So definitely climate in our farm, if you think about it, the climate is just one sort of homogeneous zone. It would be really difficult to have it be 100 degrees where I'm standing, 50 degrees in the back of the farm. It's just going to kind of even out throughout it. So if I wanted to see what would happen if I changed the temperature, or if I changed the humidity, or CO2, or wind, I would have to run my experiment, collect my data, and then change whatever variable, and then run my experiment again and compare those sort of one after each other. And same thing with nutrient concentration and pH. Although we have separate programmable pumps for our two grow rows in the back, those are both drawing from one reservoir. So even though you can kind of control how the pumps are operating, they will be taking water from the same sort of space. So that nutrient concentration and pH is going to be the same for both racks. So you would need to, like I said, kind of run one, collect your data, run the other, and then put them in comparison. So for our experiment, we're going to be figuring out how to enhance the flavor of our crops. And so I want to do this by running our experiments side by side. So what we're going to do is we're going to be concentrating the amount of essential oils or aromatic compounds present in the leaves. And there's a lot of ways we can do this, but the ways that we can test it side by side can be, we can either increase the lighting intensity, which is going to essentially sort of distill those compounds and make them really concentrated, or we can decrease the amount of water that our plants are receiving, which similarly is going to kind of concentrate those compounds down a little bit. And since increasing the lighting is going to increase our energy usage, I'm going to sort of steer away from that, and I'm going to choose to decrease the amount of water that we'll be using to water our plants in order to create a more sort of intense flavor out of them. So for a good experiment, we need to have our control variable and our experimental variable. So like I said, we're talking about our pumps here. So let's say this side of our farm, we're going to keep constant. Maybe our water is on for 5 minutes and off for 70 minutes. And then this side of the farm, we're going to be using as our experimental side. So I'm going to keep the water at 5 minutes because I want to make sure that water has enough time to pass down the entire panel and get all of the plants water. But I will change the duration of time the plants are not receiving water. So instead of it being watering 5 minutes every 70 minutes, I'm going to do it watering 5 minutes every 2 hours, so every 120 minutes. So that's very easy to do. We can just go into our programming and just type in a different number, and then we can know that it's going to take on that programming and then follow it. So now we get to the fun part and think about what sort of plants we want to grow to see what has sort of an interesting flavor that we can bring out. So we can definitely grow some arugula in here, which is nice and spicy. We can grow some wasabi arugula, which has a really nice horseradish flavor. It's definitely my favorite crop that we can grow in here. It's so spicy and delicious. I love it. And then we should also definitely grow some red vein sorrel. If that you've never had that before, it has a nice kind of lemony flavor. So really nice in salads, really pretty too. So that has a really strong flavor. We can definitely utilize that one. And we can also include any herbs that you guys are interested in. So maybe some basil, maybe Thai basil. We could do some dill, some cilantro, whatever you guys want to do. So we're going to make sure that we are planting multiple panels of each of our crops on each side to ensure most accurate data. And we're also going to be logging our observations as the plants are growing. And we'll certainly want to log the taste differences we find once we finish our experiment. So this week, we're going to start by seeding. So week 1, we're going to seed in our seedling area. We're going to put on a humidity dome so those seeds can germinate. Week 2, we're going to check in. And we're going to take that humidity dome off and compare how many have germinated. They are going to stay in here for another 2 weeks so that they're ready to grow big and strong. They're going to have nice, strong roots. And then after that point, that's when we're going to transplant them out of our seedling table into our main grow area. And they will spend about 4 or 5 or 6 weeks there before we are able to taste them and draw some conclusions from our experiment. So today's class was an example of how this farm can be incorporated into a biology or a plant biology sort of setting. But there are many applications in other fields of studies that could benefit from a farm like this, such as mechanical or electrical engineering classes, or even sort of a business and marketing class as well. So I want to thank you guys so much for your attention and for tuning in with me today to learn a little bit about integrating a farm into your classroom. And now I'm going to pass it back to Amy for our final Q&A session.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lexy. That was great. And we got a lot of great questions. I know we're coming up. We have about 3 to 5 minutes to answer some questions that came in. But just to jump right in, from David in the audience, are there any crops that cannot be grown in the shipping container? How so?
That's an interesting question. There are a couple limitations. So one thing that jumps out at me is that we have a sort of prescribed depth to our panels. If you sort of see behind me, there's going to be sort of a white sort of vertical line that shows you just how deep something is able to grow. So we have been able to grow some root vegetables, but some sort of on the smaller side. So things like radishes, small beets, small carrots, things like that. Something that would be kind of a bigger root vegetable might be a little bit trickier. Things that have sort of a specific space requirement are sort of trickier in here. We can't grow corn, although I do want to try to grow corn in here at some point. We'll see what happens. But there's a couple space limitations that will prevent you from growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for some more examples, trees, they need room for the taproot, just like you said, space limitations. Awesome. So from Jesse, what kind of fruit can you grow inside the freight farm?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I have personally grown tomatoes, like I had mentioned, but I know that there are other farmers who have grown strawberries and other sorts of berries in here. There are a couple companies that are kind of working on seeds that are sort of more optimized for this sort of growing conditions. Obviously, some things like to grow on a vine, and things that grow on a vine are a little bit tricky in here. But I've seen our team, or our community of farmers is really experimental and really creative with how they use their spaces. And I've seen farmers build scaffolds that allow the vines to grow in this space. So really the limitation is sort of like your creativity and your willingness to try to make it happen. But I've heard that we've grown a pumpkin in here before, so the world's your oyster, kind of.
Awesome. And then again, just to tack onto that, we have larger companies looking at doing crispier variety of hydroponic blueberries as well. So like you said, mainly berries, but we do see a lot of strawberries, or farmers grow strawberries as well. Awesome. So then from Bill, in growing different crops in the same container or with different harvest times, does your ability to control water introductions vary by channels, or where and how?
So that's a great question. So our channels, so our irrigation system allows water to come out of the emitters, which are over every single panel. So every single space in the farm that receives water will receive water at the same rate. That's going to be about 2 gallons per hour. You can control for how long you want that water to run for, but there's not really a way to give specific panels sort of less water. The only way to do that would be to have some on like one side and then have some on the other side that you would be running sort of simultaneously, but you can't really like skip over panels and stuff like that.
Awesome. And then one question that we did get a lot was that I can just quickly answer were how many schools currently have a freight farm? And right now we currently have over 40 schools between universities and K through 12. And one of our most recent school to get a farm was Auburn University, who will be using the farm between their horticulture department and dining. We do see a lot of our universities use it in many different applications. Even our high schools, you can use it. There's so many different applications that you can use this farm, as Lexy mentioned, as what you saw just now with an even remote class. Your students can tune in. Biology, you can solve problems, you can diagnose problems. And one thing I would recommend is check out our website. We have a whole case study on education and check out what our schools are doing with their freight farm. So we also had another question from Liam. Are there internships, opportunities to get involved with freight farms as an undergraduate student? And Lexy, I can take that one. Our recommendation would be check out our careers page. We do summer internships, so definitely check that out. We always post our current career opportunities, and we do have a lot of internships over the summer. That would be a good place to start. And then
as well, and say that
yeah,
you would be willing to sort of reach out. We do have, like I said, sort of a network of farmers across the country and across the world, and some of them might be interested in taking on sort of a student to help them out for sort of the summer. I know a lot of our farmers like to, since they're super interested in this, they want to pass on their enthusiasm, and they want, the next generation of farmers to be able to learn and be able to come into the world with this sort of skill set. So they're usually really open to sort of things like that. So another thing that you might be able to, if you're not in the Boston area, be able to reach out to us, and we might be able to kind of hook you up with somebody that you could work with.
Yeah, that actually leads us to our next question from Jacqueline. She asked, are there locations where I could see the system? She lives close to Toronto. And like Lexy mentioned, I would recommend reaching out or contacting your sales representative, and we can help you out. Of course, with COVID, pre-COVID, we were hosting larger open houses, but now we're offering, with COVID safety and precautions, everything like that, we're only doing like 1 to 2 people in a tour or virtual tours. That might be a option if you are not super close and don't feel comfortable traveling. And also if you don't know who your sales representative is, reach out to us. We can put you in contact with them. They're designated to you and help you answer any questions that you may have throughout the process. And then I just wanted to be respectful of everyone's time. So we'll ask one last question, another one from Jesse. Does Freight Farms have a list of fruits and vegetables that you can grow?
I believe we do. Is that correct, Amy?
Yeah, we have a crop guide that lists a bunch of different varieties of the crops that you can grow, and I'll actually include that in the email tomorrow. That also has the recording and a few additional resources for you to check out. And if you have any questions, feel free to also reach out to myself, Lexy, your sales representative, and we can get all those questions answered for you.
Okay. And we'll tap on that as well. That's not an exhaustive list. We are always trying to try new things. I am our R&D crop specialist here, so I love to sort of figure out what new fun things we can sort of grow in here. Always looking for suggestions. Maybe we'll try corn. I would love to try rice. That's sort of like my rabbit hole for right now, but always interested in what sort of pushing the boundaries and seeing what's possible in this space.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed. And if you didn't get any of your questions answered, again, we'll either reach out to you or feel free to reach out to us and we can get those answered for you. Again, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.